それでは時間になりましたので、これより JF-GJS イニシアティブ日本研究フェローカンファレンス2024年を始めさせていただきます。私、本日の進行係を務めます国際交流基金の高畑と申します。よろしくお願いいたします。はい、それでは開会に際しまして、国際交流基金理事長の黒沢の方から皆様にご挨拶申し上げます。よろしくお願いいたします。
皆さんおはようございます。この度は朝早くから、日本研究フェローカンファレンス2024に、お集まりいただきまして誠にありがとうございます。改めて御礼申し上げたいというふうに思います。ただいまご紹介に預かりました、国際交流基金の理事長をしております黒沢と申しますので、よろしくお願いしたいと思います。本日はですねカンファレンスは東京大学東洋文化研究所様とのですね共催という形で、開催させていただいております。改めまして共催していただいたことに、改めて御礼申し上げたいと思います。ありがとうございます。本日のですねカンファレンスの、目的といいますか、趣旨でございますけれども、私どもの日本研究フェローの皆様方をですね、各先生方に直接紹介させていただくということが大きな趣旨ではございますけれども、それだけでなくて、各フェローの皆さん方のネットワーキング、それから先生方とのネットワーキング、それからその他ご来場いただいた皆様方とのネットワーキングを人と人、あるいは研究テーマに沿った形で行っていただきたいなという思いを込めてですね、開催をさせていただいておりますので、本日一日中ございますが、その時間をですね限りなく利用していただいて、ぜひネットワーキングに努めていただきたいなというふうに思います。ちょっと話はそれるかもしれませんけど、昨今のですね日本のインバウンド状況についてちょっとお話ししたいというふうに思います。ご存じの通り、日本のインバウンドはものすごい勢いで今伸びております。2013年には1000万人を超えた状態であったんですけれども、2019年にその3倍以上となる3200万人ぐらいの訪日インバウンドのお客様が海外から来られました。たった6年間で3倍にも増えるというようなことになりまして、こういった現象というのは日本特有のもので、なかなか海外では事例を見ないケースで、非常にインバウンドツーリズムという観点では成功したというふうに言われています。その後コロナがあって当然うまくいかなかったんですけど、ここに来てやはり街中をどこ行っていただいてもご覧になって分かる通り、海外の人がですねまた多く日本に来られてまして、おそらくですね今年はですね3500万人ぐらい、2019年に比べて 10% ぐらい伸びて3500万人ぐらいの訪日外国人の方が来られるという形になるんじゃないかというふうに思います。中身をよく見るとですね、ただ以前はですね観光がメインで日本に来られてたっていう方が多かったんですね。ところがここ数年の大きな特徴は、日本に何度も来ていろんな日本の文化に触れたいと、多種多様な文化に触れてみたい、それを経験したいと、こういう方がものすごく増えているっていうのが一つ。それからもう一つの傾向は、一つの自分の趣味嗜好に合った文化を奥深く研究してみたいと、そのために日本に何度も何度も来たいと、こういう方がものすごく増えてますね。これは世界中からそういう現象が今現在起きているんですけれども、日本に来られる方のリピーター率も19年はだいたい 62% ぐらいだったんですが、昨年度でもう 68% ぐらいまで増えてるんですね。つまり何度も何度も来るっていう方が増えているという現象が起きています。ということで、世界中で今現在日本ブームが起きてまして、私どもといたしましてですね、半世紀以上前から国際交流基金として、文化芸術交流、それから日本語教育、そういったことを、それから国際対話と、今回のような日本研究を増やしていくと、 こういう活動を半世紀かけてやってきたわけですけれども、こういったことがある意味では一助となって、今回の訪日印判の減少も起きているのではないかなということで、非常にこのことを光栄に思っております。例えば日本語教育ですると、全世界で3年前のデータですけど、380万人の方が日本語を学ばれています。おそらく今年データを取ってますが、400万人を超えるんじゃないかなというふうに思っています。それだけ全世界でアニメとか漫画の影響があって、日本をもっと知りたいと、日本文化を研究したいと、こういうことが庶民レベルで起きてきているということが、今の実態なんじゃないかなというふうに思います。ただ悲しいかなですね、日本研究と、学術的な研究という分野に限って言うとですね、やはり研究者の方々の数がですね、なかなか増えてこないっていうのが、私ども非常に大きな課題として認識しております。今日お集まりの皆さん方は、そういった分野で非常に長けた皆さん方がお越しになっていただいて本当にありがたいんですけれども、まだまだ若い方々に日本を研究していただきたいなという私ども思いが強くてですね、ぜひ今回の機会を利用してですね、そういう意思を皆さんも新たにしていただいて、若手育成、次世代にもつなげていけるように、日本研究の輪を広げていっていただきたいなというふうに感じております。基調講演でですね、本日はシンガポール国立大学の日本研究学科長のリン・ベンチュー先生にお越しいただいて、基調講演をしていただきますけれども、今後の日本の研究の方向性についてお話をお伺いできるというふうにも聞いております。そういったことにも非常に興味深いですし、その他の皆様方の発表とディスカッションからですね、今後の日本研究の在り方ですとか、そういったことにもですね、一応関心を持って聞いていただければありがたいなというふうに思っております。冒頭に申し上げましたけれども、ぜひね、皆さんこういう機会でございますので、ネットワーキングを重視していただいて、交流をですね深めていただいて、日本研究の輪を広げていただきたいなというふうに思いますので、一日よろしくお願いしたいと思います。以上でございます。
黒沢理事長、ありがとうございました。では、午前のセッション、基調講演対話、次世代競争研究ネットワークの形成に向けてを開始させていただきます。まずはじめに、シンガポール国立大学日本研究学科長のリム・ベンチュー先生に基調講演をお願いいたします。先生はコーネル大学で博士号を取得され、日本の伝統芸能および文学をはじめ、日本文化のさまざまな分野について研究を進めていらっしゃいます。ありがとうございます。本日の基調講演のタイトルは、日本研究の現在地、その向かうべき方向性を探るとなっております。それでは、リム先生、ご準備よろしくお願いいたします。
皆様おはようございます。Excuse me. As introduced, I am LIM Beng Choo from the Department of Japanese Studies in the National University of Singapore. And this morning, I would like to share with you some thoughts and ideas about Japanese studies in Southeast Asia, and also hear your views about how do we work towards a community or a more collaborative basis structure in doing Japan studies in Southeast Asia. So I tried. I tried to come up with a clever topic, how do we like to be and how to be, not to be, but how to be a better Japan researcher in Southeast Asia, and like how to navigate research landscape. Now, so Here, I would first like to thank the Japan Foundation for inviting me to this conference and this networking event. I think that today's conference theme, Partnership to Co-Create a Future with the Next Generation of Japan Scholars, is a timely and important topic. What I think is this, that in the current state of technological advancement, academic research faces new possibilities and challenges. Area studies, including Japanese studies, is of no exception. So in today's presentation, I will focus on how younger generations, like a lot of people here, colleagues here, sitting here, how this younger generation of Japan scholars could navigate their research trajectory in this current climate. So and this is my outline. I share my observation of what's currently happening in academic research, which I call like the broader scenario. And then I'll turn my focus to Southeast Asian studies, Southeast Asian scholars in Japan. And then I will ask the question, what do the next generation Japanese researchers need most? Right? We need a lot of things, but what is it that is most important for us to pay attention to? This question cannot be properly answered without understanding who else are the key players in the whole scenario of building a stronger and a better Southeast Asian-based Japan studies. So I'll try to discuss that, and then I'll wrap up my presentation with a tentative conclusion and a couple of questions. And then I look forward to discussions with the younger scholars. And so this is a broader scenario. A while back, I came across this newspaper article in the Straits Times. Some of you would have known Straits Times quite well, but in Singapore. Then this is an interview of Lindsay McInerney. She's an internet designer and strategist. She was in Singapore in October to deliver a keynote speech at the Singapore Design Week 2024. So as you can see from the title of this interview article, one idea that she proposed is that in order to excel in technological design, one needs to familiarize oneself in literature and perhaps even more broadly, arts and humanities. There are many implications to this statement, really, don't you think? Yeah. These implications may include the importance of humanities in the rapidly advancing technological world, but it also highlights one important feature which is relevant to what I'm going to say today, which is the breaking down of disciplinary boundary amongst research topics. Now, in recent years, terms such as interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, cross-boundary, multidisciplinary, etc., have started to appear more regularly. Often, we see these terms on the publisher's call for contribution or panel descriptions in conferences, as well as researchers' research abstracts, indicating the trend towards a more diversified and more collaborative research agenda. So one characteristic of these projects, these like collaborative projects, is that they involve approaches, methodologies, or perspectives from different disciplines and require collaborations amongst participants of the project. Then what kind of collaborations are we thinking about? It includes establishing a common goal or goals, or integrating research techniques and theories, sharing final data, and presenting the outcome from a perspective that is different from any of the individual disciplines that started the project. So, and I just wanted to add this, that depending on the specific themes of these collaborative works, one common category of such interdisciplinary projects that are classified under as digital humanities. And if I have time, I can share a little bit more about this. But there are, of course, other kinds of collaborative projects that do not require digital technologies. So now I want to change my direction a little bit back to Southeast Asian, Japan studies. a lot of us sitting here, Japan scholars, I'm sure that we started our journey in Japan studies when we found a topic that enchanted us, that propelled us to keep researching and keep sharing with our peers and our mentors. So we were trained in earlier times, we were trained in our discipline, like, for example, how to analyze movement on the stage in theater studies, or how to identify relevant historical material in the archive if you are a historian. Or for a political scientist, how to explain certain phenomena, such as election outcome, with data. So then we would arrive at a conclusion which would be understood and appreciated by people in our field. And then our work contributed to this building and understanding of Japan studies. Now, this has been the general model in research and academic until the recent, perhaps 2 decades or so. So as I've mentioned earlier, research landscape has changed. And the traditional way of doing scholarship could and should incorporate new approaches so that we could achieve better research outcome and better result to share with researchers and with the world. So, and I think this is really a natural development in the research in also the research trajectory in Japanese studies. So, on one side of the equation is the younger researchers in Japanese studies, and they may be trained by their mentors in a more conventional methodology, but in the face of a changing research landscape, they need to first understand the merits of collaborative projects and be willing participants. There are, of course, hindrances to the adoption of a new approach different from what one is familiar with, but there are rewarding outcomes. When we share our research with an audience which is not familiar with our area, we will be asked questions that we have taken for granted, surprised often. And then the attempt to answering these questions will challenge our assumptions and broaden our perspective. Therefore, collaborative works that involve experimenting with different methodologies, engagement with researchers in different fields, and examining research outcome from a perspective different from what we are used to, will bring new light to our study. So really, what I'm trying to say here is quite simple. We need a mindset change. Mindset change, yeah? Also, while younger scholars need to be convinced that doing collaborative work outside one's comfort zone is not only rewarding, but also necessary in today's research landscape, there is also another group of people, namely academic mentors, parents, and potential employers. And these people, too, will also need to revise their understanding of research methodologies and also to revise their expectation of research outcome. I think that without the encouragement and support of one's academic mentor or family, it will be harder for the younger scholars to explore new territory. The institutions at the other end of the journey, these are the places where young scholars are going to end up starting their first career. These places, too, will also need to show their readiness to welcome a new generation of researchers whose research perspective is more interdisciplinary, and I think this is very important. So, and I want to talk a little bit also about the other players. What are the other players? You know, I think that when younger scholars, even when they are willing to participate in collaborative projects, there will be hindrances and limitations, such as accessibility to resources, a lack of common language, or lack of support from each individual's research institute. And these will be the challenges that the younger generation of researchers are going to be hit on the face. And this is where I called the other players. The other players, this is where they are needed. There are 2 broad categories of these other important players. there is on one side, there is the academic institutions, universities and colleges, as well as, and then there is also the semi-government or non-profit organizations such as the Japan Foundation or JICA. For universities and colleges, a more flexible academic structure that will allow graduate students or junior faculties to spend time in Japan or do field works will be a good start. And taking up the role of a liaison, or sometimes you call it a hub or a center, will provide a more stable infrastructure for interactions and maintenance of these collaborative programs. Provision of a tangible space, both physical and virtual, to allow for more interactions and connections amongst the scholars, both junior and senior, essentially everyone, is another important requirement that universities and programs are able to meet. One other important thing is, of course, financial support. And this is both in terms of the infrastructure of the collaborative programs, as well as the actual expenses incurred throughout the duration of the project, travel fees, sustenance, etc. Yeah? These should be granted. And this kind of financial supports are probably what the associations and foundations could do best. Then there are also academic organizations that devote to Japan studies in Southeast Asia, as I think a lot of us are well aware of, right? You know, we know that there is the Japanese Studies Association of Thailand, there is the Malaysian Association of Japanese Studies, and the Japanese Studies Association of Indonesia, etc. And I would like to say, actually, introduce a little bit about this particular association called the Japanese Studies Association, the Japanese Association of Southeast Asia, the JSA ASEAN. It was established in 2005 at NUS, at National University of Singapore, and the association has become the center for Japanese studies in Southeast Asia. Now, the JSA ASEAN remained as an important player in the research network of Japan. Associations like us can play an important role in supporting and nurturing younger Japan scholars, providing infrastructure for building network opportunities such as regular workshops, seminars, and study groups. And this is akin to being designated as like a secretariat or a semi-permanent center to facilitate infrastructures and facilitate interactions. And I think the JSA ASEAN has worked very closely with other universities in the region and foundations like the Japan Foundations. But still, I think that there is potential to develop more. And one other important role that such centers have, in my opinion, is to help transcend the language barriers amongst the Southeast Asian institutions and scholars. While it is understood that Japanese language ability is a necessary tool in doing Japan studies, it is also true that scholars in each individual Southeast Asian countries have different levels of language proficiency in Japanese or English. So, and then on top of that, there is also this undeniable fact that English is still the most important or most common lingua franca amongst Japan studies scholars globally. So, how do we transcend this problem? I don't have any grand answer or grand theory for this, but I think we could think of various ways. One possibility is to use AI. But we need to proceed with cautions with AI. And of course, I think that developing a core research group or a core research center and engaging each group member's input to build a bilingual or trilingual database is also one possibility. And of course, there are topics that rely more on statistics and data so that the language proficiency can be supported with numbers. So these are some of the things that I think will work. And these are, again, these kind of initiatives will need input from everyone, like all the players. So, I'm going to share a few thoughts as my concluding remark. This is a quick recap here. I've started by explaining that as the world is changing, academic research too needs to change. And to encourage and nurture the next generation of Japan scholars, we first need a mindset change. Everyone, scholars and mentors and institutions and so on. Meaning that first and foremost, young scholars should be willing to engage with scholars in different fields, should be willing to speak an unfamiliar language, and engage with researchers in disciplines other than theirs. And this has to be supported by educators, parents, one's own home institutions, and potential employers, such as tertiary education or think tanks, etc. Yeah? And universities, academic associations, and foundations will all need to play their part if we want to see a younger generation Southeast Asian Japan scholars thrive and develop and thrive. Essentially, it is not just about building research agenda or opportunities. It also involves the post-event effort and the continued support of the network that has been created. So, and this is what I call a strong infrastructure. Now, I didn't have time to talk about undergraduate studies here, but again, I think that just like what's happening in the graduate schools, curriculum structure has changed, job market and employer expectations have changed. Parents and probably educators' understanding of what constitutes a good education, these too have changed. So there is and then there's another interesting fact. In fact, I was just chatting with Mr. Kurosawa earlier on about accessibility to Japan. A lot of Singaporeans, my students, almost every one of my students have been to Japan even before they enter the program. So what does that mean, really? That means that access to Japan and Japanese resources have become much easier. Perception and understanding of what Japan is also no longer sort of mainly focused in schools, but it's spread out, in a much broader cultural and societal context. So all these have actually impacted students' needs, undergraduates especially, the needs and demand. So how do we advise undergraduate students in this new landscape of Japan studies? My very much simplified response will still be, as a start, we need to encourage collaborative work. We need to emphasize the need to students, the need to master the language. And then also, so it's not just like visiting Japan, go skiing for 2 weeks and then come home and say, hey, I've been look at my Instagram. It's not that. It's that you need to really sit down and learn the language. It is only through learning the language and mastering it that you could really understand more deeply a culture. So we need to emphasize that to undergraduates, and also we need to expose students to a broader and a more general curriculum of Japan, so that undergraduate students will not think that Japan equals only, say, manga or anime, right? But there's or food or fashion. There's way more than that, and we need to let students understand that. So anyway, as in the case of the graduate program, in order to achieve these goals that I've just mentioned, like in educating undergraduate, I think that obviously institutions and foundations and all the other players that I mentioned earlier will also need to play a part. So, and with this, I shall conclude my presentations, and I look forward to our discussion next. Thank you very much.
リム先生、ありがとうございました。それではここからは園田茂人先生、そして、アレソンさん、タンシンマンコンさんのお三方にも上がっていただきまして、でリム先生にももう一度舞台の方にお戻りいただきまして、今度はあちらの4つの席で対話のセッションということでお願いいたします。東京大学東洋文化研究所の園田茂人先生にモデレーターをお願いいたします。アレソンさんとタンシンマンコンさんのお二人とリム先生、 ということで、ではここから園田先生、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
おはようございます。Good morning. My name is Shigeru Sonoda. Why I'm here? Because our institute signed an MOU with the Japan Foundation. And why Professor Lim is here? Because he accidentally signed the MOU with the Japan Foundation. And that's why we are here. But anyway, thank you for being here. We'd like to start discussions based on the kind of keynote speech made by Professor Lim. Even though President Kurosawa didn't mention about the project WA 2.0, but as far as I know, the Japan Foundations will be using a huge amount of money to promote Japan studies, mostly in Southeast Asia, and that's why Dr. Lim signed an MOU with the Japan Foundation. But in order, I'll be telling the reasons why the speakers here. Because Dr. Lim, is in charge of promotion of Japan studies, not only in Singapore or NUS, but also ASEAN in general. And then why Dr. Virota Alesson Desena is here? Because he was my student. No, that's not my personal reason. But because he got a PhD here at the University of Tokyo, but he received education in the Philippines at the time of undergrad as well as a master's student. So he know a lot about the kind of education situation on Japan studies or Japanese studies in the Philippines, and he will be probably going back to the Philippines to teach courses to the students who are interested in studying something about Japan. Why Professor Tanshin Manko Pataji is here? Because she's my colleague. No, this is not a personal reason, but because she is now doing research on Thai-Asia relations in general, mostly focused on China and Japan. She got PhD from Waseda University in Japan, but before her coming to Japan, she studied in Chulalongkorn University, and after her service for Thai embassy in China, she studied her master program, master study in Waseda, and now she's our colleague. So both, Dr. Virota and Professor Tanshin Mankon is here, receiving a PhD from the university in Japan, but they have a very fresh memory of the education they received in their own local countries, namely the Philippines and Thailand. And why I'm here? Because I'm promoting a kind of global Asian studies here, but not only because of the reason, but because I had an opportunity to teach a very short, very intensive course for the youngest scholars, not only from Southeast Asia, but also from Northeast Asia, so that they will learn how to be a good researcher since the year 2018. So there are some reasons behind why we are here. Now, of course, we'll be focused mostly on the kind of Japanese education on Japan studies in ASEAN countries, but we'd like to make it open because experiences in the ASEAN countries or Singapore have some common issues to be discussed with the colleagues here who came not from South Asian countries. These are the agendas that I prepared. First, by utilizing the privilege of my being a moderator here, I'd like to put more tricky questions, two questions to Professor Lim to start our discussions. One is difficulty of collaborations. Yes, everyone will say that collaboration or collaborative research is something that we are in need of. So that's why Japan Foundation is promoting collaborative research. And also, let's say, Alesson here got a PhD from Graduate School of Interdisciplinary Information Studies. So every scholar, whether they be young or old, they talk about the importance of collaborative work. But on the other hand, we see a lot of difficulties and hardships. talking to the faculty members, frankly, our graduate school of interdisciplinary information studies they say, mostly professors say, it's quite important, but they don't do. That's something that someone else do. You do collaborative work, but don't include me. Such kind of things happens. And when I had an opportunity to talk in front of this young students from Asia, roughly speaking, 2/3 of the students say they had a very happy memory of their collaborative work. But the last 1/3 said, "Oh, professor, collaborative work it's a tragedy. I cannot remember what happened about my collaborative work with my colleague." So again, collaborative work or collaboration is desirable, necessary, but in reality, there are a lot of hardships, obstacles, and so on and so forth. So I'd like to hear Professor Lim's observations about the difficulty of collaborations. And then the second question is on the so-called conventional area study methodology. When I was very young, personally, I was trained discipline. I received a very strict disciplinary training to be a sociologist. But I received a very severe criticism of my colleague, of the area study expert. Of course, there are roughly two assumptions are there. One is that if you want to be a good area study expert, including Japan study expert, they have to acquire Japanese local languages. Because I'm studying China, I had a strong, imperative to study Chinese language. Well, but at the time of promoting collaboration, as Professor Lim mentioned, in most cases, the lingua franca will be English. Then how much we should spend time and effort to study, master Japanese language. This is one thing. The another thing is exposure to the society or the countries that you are studying. Of course, very typical case is the anthropologist who spend a lot of time visiting the kind of villages or towns they are studying. They spend a lot of time, longer time, to acquire, to get a more nuanced understanding of the people's behavior. In other words, exposure to the countries they are studying is a must. Without this, you cannot be called as an area study expert. But these are some conventional wisdom to be a very good area study expert. But again, if you're promoting collaborative studies, someone will ask you, do I really have to go to Japan? We can get a lot of information from the website. And some, out of a lot of members, someone, or at least one, must have a good understanding of Japanese culture society. But do you have the same amount of requests to the other participants in the program or the collaborative work? If this is the case, extremely speaking, you don't have to go there, but you can you can call yourself as an area study expert. So the question is, if you're promoting collaborative study, collaborative work, how much we have to respect so-called conventional area study methodology, especially the importance of acquiring or mastering, local language that the people are using in the country you are studying. These are the quick questions to Professor Lim. So I'll be giving you some time so that I'll be explaining the following agenda. Okay, the second agenda will be hearing the comments from two young speakers, namely Alison and Jason. Because as I mentioned, they I believe they still have a fresh memory of their, of their receiving education in on their mother countries. And Professor Lim is in a position to promote the kind of Japanese studies in ASEAN countries, beyond the boundary of the national boundary of Singapore. So we have to listen to, understand the local conditions. What is Japanese studies in the Philippines look like? What the Thai scholars are doing in Thailand with regard to the Japanese studies. So we want to see here their observations, experiences, as well as proposals, so that we have to discuss what to be done for the promotion of Japan studies, mostly in ASEAN, in more detailed way. And finally, we'd like you to make this kind of discussions open to the floor, so that we'll be getting some questions from the floor, as well as getting some comments or some proposals, mostly and preferably proposals from the floor, who might share the very similar experiences, or you might have a very different ideas or opinions about how to promote the kind of education program in Southeast Asia with regard to Japanese studies. Okay, these are the agendas. I'd like to hear Professor Lim's responses to my very tricky 2 questions.
Thank you, Professor Sonoda. Did you say your questions were tricky?
I think so.
Thank you for your very tricky questions. Well, yes. I thought these are 2 very important questions that we need to sort of think about, and I am not going to sit here and say that, listen carefully, I have all the answers. No, I do not. I do not have all the answers, but I do have some ideas and thoughts. So in terms of difficulty of collaborations, there's tons of difficulty, don't you think? Yeah? So, no, I think that there's but broadly speaking, there is what I would call a structural problem, structural challenge, that, coming from different institutions with different emphasis in terms of the requirements of what we need to do, what we are obligated, what we are obliged to do, will become, it's one of the more sort of intangible but hanging problem that we need to think about. But of course, at this juncture, when I say this, I was also not distinguishing between junior scholars, graduate students, and faculties. So if we are thinking about, if I can sort of divide these 2 a little bit, I would say that it is easier for graduate students to do collaborative work, because they still don't have the kind of demand that the institutions, say, the assistant professors are facing, right? So if I just quickly look at undergraduate, master students or PhD students, I think the biggest problem is, number 1, accessibility. Who is doing what, you need to know. Then you could do collaborations. And number 2, when you know who is doing what, how do you reach out to them? And then number 3, when you reach out to them, how do you plan your collaborations? And when you plan your collaborations, it will need support. How do you get the financial support, institutional support from both sides or from the parties involved? So this is for the graduate students. And also, of course, meanwhile, you still have, you don't have to publish 5 articles in 2 years. You still have to finish your thesis in order to get your degree. So there is this one restrictions there. And then the other restrictions for younger junior colleagues would be essentially it's the same thing, but there is also a sharper, a more clearer research agenda that that we have. So I think that this is a very big challenge, because of the structure that we are not sure about, or the various steps that I have just mentioned. But also financially, and I feel that I can't emphasize enough the need for just financial support. Because when we travel, when we need to look at material, we will need some kind of subsistence, right? And then so there's that. there's that. And one other problem that I think, one other difficulty that I think is important is, again, the language. And I talked a little bit about that in my presentations. But, you know, I don't want to sound so pessimistic. I think these are challenges, but these challenges can be overcome. And my suggestion, my suggestion, and I think one very important thing is that we don't want to be ambitious. We should start small, right? You know, we should start small. We can start with one smaller project, you know, amongst, say, maybe amongst 3 scholars in 3 different regions, or scholars within one university, like across different disciplines, and then build on that project, or learned from that project and start anew. So these are totally doable, right? So that's my very quick response, and I don't want to sort of like take up so much time. And I should also address the conventional area studies methodology, just one thing, really. I think that conventional area studies methodology is important because it is how we built our approaches and how we learned to how it is like the door towards what we are going to do next. So very important, yes. But then we need to be open-minded. We need to say, you know, when I was a graduate student long time ago, we need to, I hope the anthropologists in this room will not come kill me after I say that. But we need to really, really look down on like anthropologists because we thought, stupidly, like naively, thought that anthropologists were doing nothing except that go to live with some people. You know, that was so I profusely apologize for that silly and ignorant comment. But that's what I meant, right? Very close-minded. But that's not what we should do. We should totally build on and, you know, go back to our original way of like learning and studying, and then openly incorporate new ideas, and then keep like Han says, keep reflecting on what we do. That's all. Thank you.
I have many things to discuss with you, but like first of all, listen to young scholars' ideas. Okay, Alison, would you introduce yourself briefly before, you know, going into the core argument?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is, as introduced by Professor Sonoda, my full name is Alison II D. Villota, and I recently earned my PhD degree at the University of Tokyo under the program Information Technology and Society in Asia. So it's an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. It also encourages cutting-edge methodologies. And in my research, I used a methodology that cannot be considered strictly multidisciplinary or quantitative, qualitative because of the current nature of data that we are dealing right now, especially in the age of data and information technology. But more on that later. So as also mentioned by Professor Sonoda, if all goes well, I will be returning to the Philippines next year, and I will be teaching in one of the very few institutions that has Asian Studies, Japanese Studies program in the country. Oh, should I continue with my?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I thought I was just going to introduce myself, but yeah, okay. And because I have this habit of talking too much, I prepared a speech so that I can stick to the 10-minute time. Okay, so thank you, Professor Lim, for your illuminating talk about the state of Japanese studies in Southeast Asia. Some of the issues really resonated. I relate to those issues that you highlighted earlier. And then, and also the ways to move forward. And I would like to add to that discussion later. And I would also like to extend my gratitude to Professor Sonoda for inviting me to be participant in this dialogue, and also to the Japan Foundation for organizing this event. So I would like to contribute to the discussion on the topic by sharing my postgraduate journey. And then I would like to respond to some of the points made by Professor Lim, especially in the issues regarding collaboration, the necessity for multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches in Japanese studies, and also the challenges of Japanese studies students in the region, in the Southeast Asian region. So I earned my bachelor's degree in political science at the University of the Philippines in 2007, and after working as a research assistant, I decided to explore opportunities actually in Singapore, since that time the Singaporean government offers a preferential treatment for graduates of top-tier universities in the region. So I was granted a visa to look for a job. And while I was looking for an academic position, fate brought me to the corporate world. And yeah, so I landed a job in a firm that handled the highly controversial landed property, the 38 Oxley Road. Yeah. But after 2 years, I decided to return to the Philippines and pursue my master's in Asian studies. We have a very limited option. So there are 3 institutions, academic institutions that offer Japanese studies. One is, of course, Ateneo de Manila University, which offered the earliest Japan Studies program. And then we have the De La Salle University, the other top-tier private university in the Philippines. But the course is Master in International Studies. And both of those universities they have excellent programs, but my financial capacity to study in a private university didn't allow me to. So I studied at the Asian Center, University of the Philippines, where there's no specific Japanese studies course. I had to take Master of Arts in Asian Studies. And with that, I can choose a country-specific curriculum, and I chose Japan program. So, yeah. And then after I earned my master's degree, after 3 years, I fortunately got accepted to the Mombushu program, and that's when I was able to study for my PhD at the University of Tokyo. So right now, I am currently affiliated as a non-resident visiting research fellow at the Center for Global Studies, the University of Shizuoka. And because of the pandemic, some of my target goals were set aside or delayed. So for instance, my Nihongo, my plan was to start teaching at least by reaching level 2 JLPT, but that didn't happen. So I'm now working on it. And then I currently work full-time in Tokyo outside academia so that I can pay my rent while I cope with the post-PhD identity crisis, so to speak, and buy time in figuring out my career directions. So in other words, I am currently a full-time corporate slave and a part-time academic. In between days off, I was able to actually write 1 book chapter, which will be released next year. Yeah, and then if all goes well, I will be returning to the Philippines next year. But I don't want to preempt the appointment because I requested for a 1-year deferment of my appointment at that university. And then let me talk unofficially about the MA program in Asian Center. In terms of approach, the MA program in Asian Center University of the Philippines is grounded in the theories of and methods in area studies, and thus has always been multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary in its approach. And the core courses of the MA in Asian Studies program include comprehensive survey of the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial and contemporary Asia, theories and perspectives in area studies, and research methods courses that highlight the qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. So in terms of country-specific courses, I was required to take 3 mandatory courses on Japan: politics and governance, social and economic development, and culture and society of Japan. And by the way, there are 2 master's program in Asian studies. The one is Master's in Asian Studies, which is more of a professional track. It's a non-thesis track. And then there's the MA in Asian Studies, where students are expected to complete the degree by submitting a thesis. But both will have to, students from both programs will have to pass the comprehensive examination. So in general, a master's student in the Asian Center would need at least 3 years to finish an MA. Yeah. And yeah. Okay, so okay, so because of this multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary grounding of the program itself, that many of the master's theses produced are on topics about migration, pop culture, and very recently on disaster. I prepared a slide, but unfortunately I didn't have time to show it. It's a 10-year survey of all the theses produced in the Asian Center, and most of the theses are about Japanese pop culture, migration, which is very close to the Filipino diaspora experience, and then disaster. Okay, so for example, in one of the students' thesis, she analyzed Japanese pop idols using dramaturgy as one of her primary analytical lenses. And if I may share my thesis, I used the Asian Student Survey datasets, which Professor Sonoda spearheaded. It was his project for a very long time. And here I examined Japanese pop culture consumption and country perceptions by drawing insights from the soft power paradigm model in international relations. So in other words, majority of the knowledge produced about Japan can hardly be classified as the conventional topics, so to speak, in Japanese studies. And then in another topic, I would like to express my complete disagreement with Professor Lim about the importance of meaningful collaboration among stakeholders in the region, not just by the institutions that will serve as the support system, but also students of Japanese studies. And this is where I would like to express also my gratitude to the Japan Studies Association, JSA ASEAN, for serving as this very platform for students like me to forge network and collaborate with other fellow Japan scholars. So I first joined the JSA ASEAN graduate student workshop in 2016 in Cebu, and then the most recent was in Chiang Mai. So there I met a lot of scholars from Southeast Asia, and we are exchanging opportunities. And in fact, my friend from Indonesia was able to pursue his PhD because we were exchanging information about those kinds of opportunities. And then on the issue of regional challenges in promoting Japanese studies in Southeast Asia, it is interesting to note that Professor Lim and one of the scholars in the Philippines, Japanese studies scholars in the Philippines, Dr. Carl Cheng Chua, shared the same sentiment regarding language, funding, and resources as the major stumbling blocks in promoting Japanese studies in the region. But thankfully, during my time, the conference grants policy in my university was revised, and graduate students became eligible to apply, even master's students. So in some of the conferences that I attended while I was doing my master's, I got my funding from the university, because we are now renting vast lands in the Philippines, in the campus, as now there are malls. So the university is earning money from that. And then also, when I was writing my MA thesis, I also managed to get a grant which allowed me to stay in Kyoto University for 2 months to do library research. But of course, grants like these are competitive and limited, and therefore only few will be able to avail of such opportunities. And that's why I think it will really help graduate students in my university if there's a fieldwork grant or something that will fund students stay in Japan to collect data or conduct field work. And then in addition to ways that student collaboration can be promoted is through joint ZEMI with students from different universities, not just in Southeast Asia, but also in Japan. So before COVID-19 happened and before Zoom was invented, Professor Sonoda and Professor Yuneno Reyes, Michio Yuneno Reyes, made it possible to have a joint semi with our classes. And this was a very meaningful moment in my graduate student life because finally we were able to see and listen to the kind of research topics that students from the University of Tokyo are doing and vice versa. So if we can institute or support and sustain this similar undertaking, it should be able to nurture a tightly knit network of scholars in the region in Japan and also have a more integrated knowledge production. And then for my final point, language is definitely a big hurdle, but not impossible to overcome. And while JSA ASEAN has been successful in providing platform for bilingual setup for scholars, I would also like to ask Professor Lim and perhaps the Japan Foundation if, I think you mentioned this in passing earlier about the repository of research in Southeast Asia and Japan that will be available at least in 2 languages. And this will result to perhaps a more integrated knowledge production, especially in survey of literature, because in most cases, students from my university will be limited to English sources, while those from, say, Thailand and Indonesia, where students have more proficiency in the Japanese language, they will probably be prefer researching on or using references written in Japanese. So if we can have that translation and then a repository, and of course, breaking the paywall would be really good, will really benefit the students. And okay, and with that, I think I would like to end my short speech. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Patachitang Sinwankong, but yeah, please feel free to call me by my nickname Jay. I'm currently an assistant professor at the Institute of Advanced Studies on Asia. I'm the colleague of Sonoda Sensei. My work is about the Thai diplomatic history and also the perception of China, US, and Japan. Okay, so I have prepared 2 points to exchange. The first one is about the mindset change mentioned in Professor Lim's speech. So this one is the second point, so I will touch upon it later. So I totally agree with your point that we should change our mindset to be more interdisciplinary. However, I try to be a devil's advocate here to enrich the discussion. My point is that I think that we young scholars, we are eager to change. Yeah, we are willing to be the interdisciplinary. However, the circumstances and the infrastructure does not allow us to do so yet. And only senior professors can only talk about interdisciplinary because they already established themselves as an expert in one field already. As you mentioned, who is doing what is very important. So discipline seems to be very important in your identity as a scholar. Yeah, and it seems like you need to have a solid foundation in particular discipline first. Otherwise, there is nowhere you can stand in this world. Yeah, if you start by being interdisciplinary from the beginning, then your identity might be unclear and your knowledge risk being shallow. And in reality, I think like when we submit an dissertation, then you will get this kind of question from your mentor. What is the discipline of your research? Is it history? Is it social science or whatever? And when you submit a paper through the journal or a book into the publisher, then they will ask, what is the discipline of your work? Because they have to think about the sales strategies and where to locate your book in the bookshelves in the bookstore, right? This is the reality. And when you apply for the grant, for example, JSPS, Then, before you fill in the application form, you need to define your field of study, whether it's politics, whether it's history, and the choice you put there will determine who will review your application, and it will significantly impact your chances of securing the grant. Yeah, this is the experiences that I had in these 4 years. So my point is that we are ready to change, but the circumstances and the structure of this industry do not allow us to do so. So what do you say? Yeah, that is my first point. And the second point is about other players. I would like to share with you the situation in Thailand, the situation of Japanese studies in Thailand, so that maybe we can exchange about similarities and differences later. So this, as Sonata Sensei just kindly introduced, I used to major in Chinese, and then I jumped to do Thai perceptions of China and Japan later in my master and my PhD. So this is data, these are the conclusions that I base on the reviews of the journal about Japanese studies in Thailand, conferences about Japanese studies, and also the interview with my researcher's friend. So in short, this is the conclusion, the last line. Situation of Japanese studies in Thailand is that there we can see the rising demand for Japanese cultural products and also the language courses, but there is always a shortage of Japanese studies researchers. And most of the work are in linguistics, literature, in humanities, the social science work are very, very limited in Thailand. Yeah, this is a situation in Thailand. And you mentioned the Japanese Studies Association in Thailand. However, the members in 2024 are limited to 134 members in Thailand. I just went to a conference about Japanese studies in Thailand, and the director mentioned this number. And I think that my conclusion is that I think the rise and fall of Japanese studies in Thailand depends a lot on the so-called other players, as you put it. And I think we can categorize these other players into these three groups, the upstream, the midstream, and the downstream. So the upstream, of course, it's the geopolitics always matter, right? So the increasing China's influence in Southeast Asia make many Japanese scholars shift the focus from Japanese studies to Chinese studies or Mekong studies, especially after Chinese pour a lot of grants like LMC, Lanchang Mekong collaboration into Southeast Asia. And the second is relative to this first point, the Japan's reduced global presence make Japan less attractive target of studies in recent year. In Thailand, we can see the boom of Japanese studies in 1980s, 1990s. But now it's the presence is become decreasing. And most of the Japanese studies, when I do the review, it's either about involvement of Japan in Thailand or about Japan as alternative or model. Studies about, in other words, it's more about the studies about Japan to understand more about ourselves or to find a better alternative for, for example, governance or democracy or decentralization. So it's more about a study about Japan to understand more about ourselves. So it means that when Japan has less global presence, it's equal to less involvement in Thailand and less attractive target of study. So we can see decreasing trend in Thailand. And also the third one, I found this very interesting, the perception of politics in funding industry. Okay, so this is my observation that it is hard to find a scholar who do Japan-China relations or Japan-Korea relations or East Asian relations. And I made an interview to my friend, and then he told me that there is this widespread belief that the funding agencies, it might be not belief, it might be true that the funding agencies is an extension of national interest. So it means that, there's the rumors that if you, the scholar, used to receive the fund from Japan, you cannot get funding from China, or vice versa. Yeah, especially when the relations between Japan and China become worse, then it's become very sensitive. So these discourage us from cross-disciplinary research or also the cross-boundary research. Scholars live in their own academic silos and they are very self-censored about the topic that they are doing. They don't dare to touch the critical. They don't dare to have critical stance and don't dare to touch the sensitive issues. This is the big picture, the geopolitics, the upstream. And when it comes to the midstream, that's the domestic politics. So as we know, the research institute, most of them got fundings from the government. And when it comes to the National Research Fund, they normally prioritize research that align with the national strategies. So normally the research about development or applying science are more welcomed. And the research about area studies, like Japanese studies, normally they got only 1 year grant and very limited budget. But it also means that the funding from organization like Japan Foundation is not only important, but vital to sustain the Japanese studies in Thailand. This is the midstream, the domestic politics. And the downstream is the personal consideration or the price they have to pay to be an area specialist. So being a university lecturer or researcher in Thailand is not that attractive anymore because as you might have known, the salary is not very high and the position is very limited. So you really need a strong passion and commitment to become one, for example, Japanese specialist. And in the private sector, the Japanese interpreter can earn starting salaries twice as high as university lecturers. So people tend to go to major in Japanese, and then after they graduate, they work in private sectors. So we don't have a lot of Japanese specialists in Thailand. I can think of maybe around 10 famous scholars, and that's all. So as a result, we can see an increase in undergraduate Japanese majors, but a decline in graduate level Japanese studies. And while there are rising consumption of Japan cultural products, but there is a shortage of researchers in Japanese studies. And it makes the Japanese studies in Thailand a student-led rather than a scholar-led field. However, I don't want to end this with a disappointment and dark and gloomy atmosphere. I think we still can have build some networks. There are some possibilities because research in language and literature still have a lot of room to expand. And for social science, as I mentioned, our interest in Japan often stems from seeking a model or an alternative for our own country. So to expand networks, maybe we should not rely only on Japan specialists. That might not be enough. We could broaden the network by putting Japan back to Asia and maybe connect the scholars across countries, which include Japan, through the keywords or issues or disciplines. This approach could foster more collaborative connections and also increase Japan's visibility within the broader academic community. That is my points. Yes, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Well, there seems to be a very impressive contrast between Professor Lim's future-looking, positive, super positive attitudes and very much realistic, a bit pessimistic, evaluation of what is happening in ASEAN countries. Well, before making the discussions open, I'd like to hear Professor Lim's feedback to their comments. Briefly. 3 minutes or something? No. We should have 30 minutes for discussions with the floor.
Thank you very much. Very interesting and very inspiring. I will try to keep my comments short because I think it'll be very interesting to hear from like Sonoda Sensei and everyone else in the audience too. I think I will respond first to Eugene, and I really like your slide. Actually, yeah, I thought that it has very neatly encapsulate all the issues there, and it's lots of things I wanted to. I'm just going to pick like two very important things to respond to. Yeah, this is about discipline and identity. So there's always this like dilemma of discipline versus discipline specific, or the idea of discipline specific like projects versus the interdisciplinary projects. In fact, when I teach my graduate students in the graduate seminar, I often ask the students, now, who do you think you are? Not that, who do you think you are? Not that, but who do you think you are in terms of research? Right? Are you a theater studies person? Are you a historian? Are you a social, an economist? This is important, right? Because we have to sort of like know what is our main focus, right? So for me, it is always like traditional culture. Like what does personally, right? I always think like, what is tradition? How is tradition related to traditional performance, and what is traditional performance? So this is my kind of like identity framework, right? So yes, we need that. We absolutely need that to be able to know what we are doing and have kind of like a sense of directions, right? Yeah. But of course, there's also so this is important, but also and it is also true that a lot of time we will be asked, right, in journals and panels and institutions, application forms. But this does not mean that we fill in the forms, we write down what we are, like, but it doesn't mean that you need to stop there, don't you think, right? So you could expand. Nobody says that you could only say one thing. You can say one thing and you can do more than one thing. So I think that is one thing that is very important. But yes, I think identity, to start with an identity, is important. And I think that you want to also like intuitively, I would share with my junior colleagues that I think you will find like-minded people amongst. I'm being cautiously optimistic. IR term, I was told. Yes, and then also, I also think that the funding agency's agenda is almost a given, no? I think that, yeah? So I feel that sometimes we need to sort of like work towards the possible aspects and try to sort of accommodate, right? And in the process of doing so, perhaps we could exert a little bit of influence and change slowly, right? And there's another way that I think junior scholars could work with is to work like pair with senior scholars. So I think it is our responsibilities as senior scholars to understand and to work together with younger people, younger scholars, so that we could, it would be a very interesting perspective, right? So we could work together and sort of like bring everyone, oneself included, to a different place, a better place. So that's just like the two main things that I wanted to say. And yeah, we can talk later. Okay. And also to Ellen's comments, you said integrated knowledge production. I like that. That's exactly what we are working towards, don't you think? Yeah, I think that we really wanted to do that, and the issues and I think integrated knowledge production as a goal is a good goal. It's actually not, I mean, calling it a good goal is not like a very good description, so many goods in one sentence. But my point is that I think this is something that we want to think about. You know, Alan talked about qualitative, quantitative, mixed methods, and so on. And this is exactly what I was thinking, right, about collaborations. This is how we sort of like get people from using these different methodologies and then to work together so that we could like create this integrated knowledge production. And you know, again I think we need to do things like small steps. We need to have the broader idea, but we need to take small steps, because if we don't take that first step, we will never go anywhere. Well, maybe we take the first step and then we take second step and realize that there's really nothing right there, like, you know, then we retreat a little bit and go to a different direction. I think that's the kind of spirit we, especially younger people with a lot of energy, should do that. Ganbatte.
Well, now we'd like to start a kind of the open discussions, even though there's no pre-arrangement about how to get the kind of comments from the floor. But I'm thinking of it's worthy of asking two persons here to listen their voices. One is from Hara-san, who's now in the responsible position to promote the project WARP 2.0. And far as I know, the Japan Foundation is now designing a lot of some sort of education program to nurture the spirit of mutual learning between the young scholars in ASEAN who are interested in knowing about Japan and the scholars in Japan. But after hearing, especially from two young scholars, critical voices, I happened to started asking myself, is it really necessary? Is it really desirable? Let's say, because most of the Japan's scholars in let's say in Thailand, they want to learn something as an alternative model. But I'm not sure whether this is a good entry to start a dialogue between Thai scholars in Japanese studies and some scholars in Japan. But I was wondering whether mutual learning can be a good keyword for designing the education program in ASEAN countries. And the second person is Professor Simon Avenel. Simon, you're there, right? I know, I didn't intend to meet you so that I'll be hearing your voices when I met you in last September. But I know he was a former colleague of Professor Lim, who is now teaching courses in an Australian National University. I'd like your comments, and then after getting your voices, if someone has to be answering this, then we'll start discussions. Hara-san, would you say something?
This is not the part of the plan, but yes, it's very interesting discussion because we always say that in the interdisciplinary mutual learning is desirable, and but it's actually really hard to kind of put it into action. And but still, I firmly believe that in order for the regional studies, or for that matter, the humanities, to survive under the current sort of academic, the landscape where the scientific sort of subjects are more preferred in universities everywhere. I think the burden is much harder, much bigger on the younger scholars, I'm sure, but it's no longer a choice. So the mutual learning is something that you have to do in order to survive, not just for you as a sort of individual scholar, but as a sort of the research area as an area study itself. So I firmly sort of accept, and also applaud Dr. Lim's keynote speech today. That this is something that's doable, and then not only just doable, but this is something that we all have to do. And in order to do that, we in Japan Foundation can actually provide as much help as possible for the younger academics in not only in Southeast Asia but everywhere else.
That Mr. Hara proposed, especially to the younger scholars, to think of humanities or social sciences in general rather than individual survival. That's a message that I got. But I'm not sure whether young scholars can have a strong identity with a part of larger academic community. Young scholars are more focused on their own survival, individual survival, rather than collective survival. But I'm not sure. Okay, Simon.
Thanks very much. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the really fascinating presentations. And good to see Beng Choo Lim after quite a while. So I spent about 9 years in Singapore before I moved down to the Australian National University in 2013. And just a couple of things occurred to me while I was listening to the presentations. I guess the question of collaboration was one thing that I was thinking about, and I guess my question is, what is collaboration? And that, when you try to start to define that, it becomes really, really complex, because I think there are various ways of being able to collaborate, and maybe we need to think of collaboration in far more diverse ways than we have to date. The first thing that probably comes to mind when we talk about collaboration is, a group of scholars being tied together at the waist, and you start your research out in the field together, and you're there right to the very end until you publish your paper, and you're stuck together no matter what. I think there's more kind of a diversity in the ways that we can think about collaboration, and that may mean really kind of that sort of traditional collaboration, but it also may mean just sharing the kind of data that we're working with, and then going off and using that data in different ways. It may be exchanging knowledge in terms of our disciplinary backgrounds. So I think there are creative ways of thinking about collaboration, and the point that probably needs to be made in connection with that is that the funding agencies, Hello Japan Foundation, also it would be really good if they could also understand that as well, that there are many different ways of collaborating, and an understanding of that in when it comes to making decisions about funding would also help. And also, different disciplines work in different ways. And I think in some disciplines, it's far easier to collaborate, and it's actually quite normal to collaborate. In other disciplines, say you're a historian, you're working alone out there in the archives, the tendency is to collaborate in different ways in that case. So I guess an understanding of those different models of collaboration would be really useful when it comes to funding, and also thinking about the ways that we can work together. I was going to say something else too. Yes, so in relation to Japanese studies more generally, and how we can sort of connect scholars in Japan to scholars working elsewhere, that's really important. But I also think that when we think about Japanese studies, we can think about it more globally, in the sense of it's not only, say, Singaporean Japanese studies scholars connecting to scholars in Japan. It's also about Japanese studies scholars connecting globally as well. And one thing I always felt during the years that I was in Southeast Asia was we know very little about the kind of Japanese studies scholarship that's being produced in languages other than English or Japanese, in my case. So I don't know what Chinese scholars are writing in Chinese. I don't know what Vietnamese scholars are writing. I don't know what's being written in Indonesia. And there's that barrier always sort of troubled me because I know there's knowledge there that I can't touch, that I can't connect with. So, and I know this probably brings in the discussion about AI as well. How can those sort of tools help us to understand different ways of knowing Japan? And it seems like to date, it's really been the Anglophone countries, Japan, with input from certain European countries as well. But that's the extent of it. And I'm sure there's a lot more out there that we can know if we just have access to that. So maybe that's another way we can start to think about how can we open up barriers in terms of Japanese studies going forward. So they're just a few comments from me.
Thank you, Professor Simon Avenel. Okay, I'd like to hear Professor Lim's responses too, especially to Professor Avenel's questions about definition of collaboration.
Yes. Thank you, Simon. Like Professor Avenel has said, we were like old colleagues, and it's very nice to be here to seeing old friends, and several other old friends. So collaborations and networking is happening practically, happening in present tense. But yes, very quickly, my response to what Professor Avenel says about the nature of collaborations is exactly what I had in mind, right? We don't have to sort of I think you use the word stuck, we don't have to get stuck with each other. And just as an example, I finished a project a few years ago on Japanese performances in Singapore. It's a digital humanities project. And I had a set of questions, and I had a very broad, not very well defined but method. So upon finishing that particular project, I was hoping, I still am hoping to sort of create a same kind of a project among Southeast Asian countries. So why do I want to do that? I want to do that in order to understand not just Japanese influences and impacts on performances in Singapore, but also Japanese influences and impacts in the Philippines, in Thailand, right? So if we could sort of if I were able to sort of do a collaborative project on the broader idea of this kind of this particular topic, then it will be an interesting collaborations, right? So then we not only, and I come back to what Eugene has saying, that we learn about Japan in order to learn better about ourselves too, and I think that is important. And so yeah, that I'm just repeating what Simon has said. And then about the Japanese scholars globally and the language issues, I think that's what Alan also mentioned a little bit just now. And yes, I recently was in Shanghai, and I received a book on Japanese studies in China. It was a huge book. It was done by Professor He Ping from Fudan University, and I thought that I learned so much. But it's in Chinese, right? I mean, I could read Chinese, so I could understand it. So what Simon pointed out really is true. And then therefore back to what Ellen was saying, how do we do this? How do we sort of how do we sort of get information across language boundaries? I think this is important. And there was an organized, I think Gaigokugo Daigaku, Tokyo Foreign Studies, since a few years back, they started invited scholars from Africa and from South America to attend their attend their annual summer program. And I thought that was a fabulous idea, because we didn't know what Japan scholars in these regions are doing. So, as a step one, perhaps we could we could invite scholars across the boundary so that we can get together. At least we sort of like establish the connections. So that's what I thought. 以上です。
I know that we can see some stuff from the Sumitomo Foundations, which has been supporting the kind of researches on Japan since the year 1991. And 2 days ago, we had a kind of a selection committee meeting to know about the distribution of number of applications from different parts of Asia. Jason Happen mentioned that Thailand has come to have a lesser number of experts in Japanese studies, but when it comes to the number of applications, large, more than 70 applications came from the Philippines, came from Thailand. And also the same can be said to the Malaysia, Indonesia as well. But if you look at the contents applications, it seems to me that some of the applicants do not know well about Japan. But they utilize the model of learning from Japan model to justify why they are applying for the Sumitomo Foundation to get funded. So it shows something very paradoxical situation. As some of you mentioned, when it comes, if you define the kind of so-called expert of Japan studies in a very strict sense, yes, we can see a very few number. But those who are interested in understanding Japan, whether it be Japanese politics or Japanese technology or whatever, there's huge potential. But there's some gap between these two different groups. And whenever I read the application, I feel the necessity of the applicants having some connection with researchers in Japan so that they can enrich their proposal. But somehow they are lacking in such network. So that's why their proposal will be a bit out of the mark. So it's really pity. We have a lot of applications, and the foundations and Sumitomo wanted to support them. But simply because of applicants' lack of connections or network, the contents applications is not appealing enough. Well, I'd like to hear your voices, how to make connections, how to enrich the network, to make the proposal more, attractive, appealing, or more promising.
Okay, personally, I think the answer lies in your question already. Maybe we need to redefine the so-called Japan specialist in a broader sense. Yeah, because as you mentioned, like recently there are more discussions about because now Thailand, we are in the phase of democratization, and there are like the democratic movement in the country, and there are a lot of discussions about what country can be the model for us to decentralize or to democratize. And Japan came into picture quite a lot. Like Japan seems to be model of decentralization. So yeah, maybe. Yeah, as I mentioned at the end of my presentation, that maybe when we talk about Japan specialists, it should not like only limited about people who know best about Japan anymore, but people who want to learn from Japan, or to set Japan as some model or some example or something. Maybe we can include these people into the picture. Maybe that's another way, another strategy to expand this. Yeah, that would be my idea.
Okay, thank you. But in order for, let's say, scholars in Japan to understand, what are the local need from, let's say, Thailand, they have to know about Thailand, right? But when it comes to local scholars in Thailand, they understand they want to learn from Japan, but how they can make network with scholars in Japan is something that we have to think seriously.
Yeah. So I think like what you are promoting in our institute is real. Do you want me to tie in?
I'm not imposing you to do so.
Okay. Yeah, so my point is that maybe we can connect by issues or the keywords, like yeah, when we want to do about, for example, Buddhism, or when we want to do about democracy, like we can connect what Japan is doing and Japanese case with Thai case, Filipino case, and also Taiwanese case. Like, yeah, we can connect many other cases, and that would be also the chance to increase the visibility of Japanese studies in the Asian studies as a whole. Yeah, that would be my answer.
Okay, thank you. Even though the time is up, but I'd like to, Hara-san, allowed us to extend by 10 minutes. So I'd like to hear several voices from you. So those who have any states, please raise your hand. Okay.
Thank you so much for this fascinating panel. My name is Tian. I'm from Tobunken. I'm very blessed to be a migration scholar based in the discipline of political science, which means I naturally have a very interdisciplinary network, right? But I have some observations that I wanted to share and ask the panel for their ideas about how we can change the situation. Within my network, within my experiences, it's not that young scholars don't want to do interdisciplinary work. It's that the incentive structures are not there for them to do that. Now we live in a period where younger scholars are less likely to have a stable job. They might be applying every few years to a new position, having to think about who will evaluate their applications, who will have to be their colleagues, who can appreciate their work. We also have a situation where, with collaboration in different ways, there's many ways to do collaboration, but some ways can be pitfalls for younger scholars. So for example, in a couple collaborative projects we worked on, and maybe some of you may understand, older scholars tend to have different timelines and deadlines compared to younger scholars who are needing to get publications out. And so these things can get really delayed. Or, right, when we have an interdisciplinary piece of thing, like going out to a special issue or going out to a journal, right, the review process can be significantly extended because they have to amass reviewers to actually be able to review a very interdisciplinary body of work. So these things all really matter for younger scholars because we don't have the security that older scholars do. I'm really appreciative to the Japan Foundation because they really supported my interdisciplinary work, but I wanted to ask kind of more senior scholars in the field as well as senior administrators who have some control over the incentive structures and employment systems, right? If they can do something to kind of encourage this collaboration. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other different voices from you?
Hi, this is Emi Otsuji, and I'm this year's JF Fellow. But I'm also the president of Japanese Studies Association of Australia. And I would like to, this is not, I think it's more like a proposal than comments. But anyway, first of all, thank you very much for the wonderful panel, and I really learned a lot. But I have a lot, it was a great session that I can take home. But anyway, what I want to say is about the publication. So the Japan Foundation used to offer this beautiful journal called New Voice, which was the interdisciplinary journal for younger scholar to publish. And in Australia, it's very important to have a great track record, especially for people who young scholar who wants to get into academia. But there's not many. We do have the Japanese Studies Association of Australia. It has a great journal called Japanese Studies, but it's really competitive. So for younger scholars to start the career, I think it's good to revive the New Voice, because I think LIM Beng Choo student also published in a journal. A couple of my students published in the journal, and then that was the stepstone to become the full Japanese Studies scholar. But unfortunately, because of the financial constraint, the Japanese, I think, the New Voice has been discontinued or opposed. So I just want to propose that would be a great avenue for younger scholars to start their career. So I want the Japan Foundation to rethink about the revival of the journal. I'm sorry, I don't want to upset you, but I'm not attacking you or anything, but I just wanted to appreciate that the Japan Foundation actually had this beautiful journal called The New Voice. And yeah, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Whoa, big crowd. Okay, I'd like to get one more, if any voices from you. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Smritima. I'm also a Japan Foundation Indo-Pacific Partnership Fellowship. I enjoyed everyone's presentations, and especially Jeet, you said I could refer to you as. I think, again, your diagram was very interesting, and also what you said about, having collaborative projects and how it's important to have different experts on, and also kind of not only just experts from Japanese studies, but also collaborations from people from outside of Japan who also have Japanese expertise. My only small suggestion, not only to Japan Foundation, but to other foundations also who give scholarships and grants, was maybe also promote like a network of past scholars or past fellows, and who can then sort of act as advisors or supervisors, or just kind of provide more of a psychological support as well to the newer fellows. Because, like as a new person or a new scholar who's entering a field, say like Japan, I'm not a Japanese speaker, so yet I'm doing like a collaborative project. So if there is somebody who's had a similar experience, just that psychological support also sort of, I think, is very encouraging in an already very enriched environment. So yeah, thank you.
Well, there's no concluding remark here. Of course, the reason of making this discussion open is to keep discussing at the time of lunch. Lunchtime will be 2 hours, probably. Hi. Okay, you want to say? Before, okay.
Sorry, I know everyone is hungry. This will be really, really short. In terms of infrastructure that I was just talking about, I really also think that we do need not just a platform for connections and collaborations, but we also it would be wonderful, to have a journal like New Voice that is a space and a publication space, a space for younger colleagues' publications, because we all know how difficult it is to send a journal to, Journal of Japanese Studies, etc. So I, Professor Otsuji's comments, I think it really what is the phrase to say? I really totally superly identify with that. And I think because my own mentee, my student, she also has a article in New Voice, and we were all very excited, right? Because she is a new generation, like groundbreaking younger queer studies scholar, Yuan Shumin. So when I saw her article in that journal, we are all very excited. We think that that's a good place for junior scholars, right? To sort of like, instead of having to jump through all these hurdles and try to identify your field, etc., if we have that, a publication platform, which already is in the system, that would be a wonderful idea, right? Yeah, I hope I hope you agree with me. Thank you.
はい、では、リム先生、園田先生、アレソンさん、単身文庫さん、本当にありがとうございました。皆様、もう一度拍手をお願いいたします。以上で午前中のセッションを終了させていただきます。先ほども申し上げましたように、このホールの外でポスターを貼ってあります。皆様にご協力いただいて、全国各地でご研究をいただいている皆様から、質問の方からお投げした3つの質問に対してお答えを書いていただいています。そのポスターがこちらの方のスペースに貼ってありますので、先ほど皆様にお配りしたビニールポケットの中に入っている付箋ですね、そちらとボールペンを使っていただいて、ポスターを見ながらぜひコメントなどをしていただき、実際今日はですね、そのポスターを書かれた研究者の方がそこにいらっしゃるので、ぜひ交流を広げていただければと思います。この機会をこういったネットワーキングにぜひ具体的に利用していただければと思います。それでは午後2時からのスタート、よろしくお願いいたします。